What is up, nerds? Paul Conti here with some more Blood for the Blood God. We are going to talk today about the Bloodletter bomb. This is a list archetype that has been hanging out for a while now, that is found its way to some top tables at some big events. So I thought it was worth talking about, especially in light of the Blades of Khorne book. So there's some possible changes to the list, some possible different ways to do it. So I wanted to talk about, for people that play Khorne, how to assemble a list with the Bloodletter Bomb, and for people that don't play Khorne, have an idea of what it is and, some possible ways they can maybe try and defend against it, or at least be prepared and aware of its existence, so that they can try and do something about it in an event, or at least know what to properly complain about when they lose. Anyway, first, let's look at the Bloodletter War Scroll itself, because this is where like 90% of the magic of this list happens. So right off the top, things don't look that exciting. They're movement 5, 5 up save, 1 wound each. They're demons, so they have bravery 10. That's pretty good. They have 1 attack each, 4 up, 3 up, rend 1, 1 damage. So far, really not exciting for a 100 point unit. Um, there's a lot of text on here. I'm going to just draw your attention to the 2 items that really matter for what we're concerned with here. First, the decapitating blow ability. If the roll for the Hellblade, the melee weapon for the Bloodletters, is a 6 or more, the blow inflicts a mortal wound instead of its normal damage. The key in there is 6 or more. So when you make modifications to the hit roll, that means you are effectively hitting on higher than a 6. So you can get more mortal wounds out of this at lower rolls. So, for example, if they get +1 to hit, a 5 or a 6 results in, after modifiers, a 6 or a 7, therefore generating a mortal wound. The second ability that we need to focus on is the Murderous Tide ability. So Bloodletters attacking en masse are terrifying. They swarm and eviscerate foes with their Hellblades. You can add 1 to hit rolls made for a Bloodletter if the unit contains 20 or more models. So these guys have a built-in buff to hit, which means they have a built-in ability to do mortal wounds on 5s. That is an important starting point to understand with this. So prior to the Blades of Khorne book, here's what the old construction of these lists looked like. You would take multiple units of Bloodletters, 30 to 40 strong. You didn't want to go with that bare minimum 20 just in case you lost some Bloodletters along the way. Most commonly, I've seen 30, although I have seen some people run 40s. Then they would use SAYL the Faithless. He has a spell which changes a unit's movement characteristic to 18 inches for the turn and gives them the fly ability. Then they would also add Blood Secretors onto this to add to the number of attacks that the Bloodletters could do. So you had a large block of Bloodletters that were hitting on 3s, doing mortal wounds on 5s. They moved 18 inches, and they flew, so they're ignoring terrain. Now, typically that is going to get you all the way across the board and have an easy charge, top of turn 1. Let's say you have a unit of 30 Bloodletters. You manage to get them all in range of their weapons with the enemy, and they have a Bloodsecrator in range. So that is 60 attacks, and they are going to be doing mortal wounds on 5s. So out of those 60 attacks, 20 are going to do mortal wounds. That is a lot. Well, statistically anyway. Obviously, your mileage may vary. The rest of the list, just kind of fill in the blanks with other typical chaosy stuff. This is a very strong list. Basically, you take a block of Bloodletters, you throw them across the board, and you just do a lot of mortal wounds with them. And there's very little your opponent can do about this. Now, with the new Blades of Khorne book being out, you can't take SAYL with a Mark of Khorne. Therefore, he would break your Khorne allegiance, so you wouldn't get any of the other allegiance abilities in your list. So this kind of creates a problem that in order to get all of the allegiance abilities of Khorne, you would have to sacrifice SAYL. But by sacrificing SAYL, you reduce some of the effectiveness of, like, you don't get SAYL's movement shenanigans. And you need to find other ways to buff the movement of the Bloodletters to make them effective in combat. So, what do we do with this? So, we've first of all got to assess what we're actually replacing when we're losing SAYL. SAYL changes the movement of one unit to 18 inches for one turn. That's basically enough to fling them all the way across the board and do crazy, nasty things to your opponent. So Bloodletters have a natural movement of 5 inches. So what we need to do is replace 13 inches of buffs. One of the good ways to do this is using the Murder Host Battalion, which basically is run a whole bunch of units of Bloodletters and a Bloodletter hero, and it satisfies the battalion for relatively inexpensive, and it adds 2d6 extra movement to each of your Bloodletter units within, I believe, 8 inches of a Bloodletter hero on the first hero phase of the game. And then if you have the complete battalion, if you have it maxed out, you can do it every hero phase. I don't think that's probably like a wise way to go, but it's something to think about. 2d6 movement is going to average you 7 inches. So out of the 15 inches that, the 13 inches that we're missing out of SAYL, we've satisfied 7, so we're looking for 6 more inches. Adding Bloodstokers to the list. Bloodstokers can buff the charge of any unit with a Khorne mark, so that's an extra 3 inches to the charge. So now we've gotten rid of 10 inches on average out of the 13 inches of movement that SAYL would have given us. So then we have the Bloodthirster of Insensate Rage, or the Violent Urgency command trait that will let us re-roll charges. So we're really giving up a guaranteed 18 inches to get 2d6 movement plus, an extra 3 inches on the charge with re-rolling failed charges. So it's not quite as good. It's not quite as reliable. But there's some other upsides to not using SAYL, and these are where this gets to be pretty important. First of all, your slaughter priests can take blood blessings. The key one being the Killing Frenzy blood blessing, which gives +1 to hit. So that's an extra +1 to hit on top of the +1 that they're already getting. And you can take multiple instances of this because priests and prayers are not subject to the rule of 1. So you can stack this ability if you use multiple slaughter priests with multiple Killing Frenzy prayers onto 1 unit of Bloodletters. You can theoretically get your Bloodletters to do mortal wounds on 2s by stacking Killing Frenzies. That is really awesome, really important. The Gore Pilgrims Battalion, it makes that whole Slaughter Priest, the whole Blood Secretor and Slaughter Priest thing much more reliable. In the old version of this, in order to get the Blood Secretor Portal of Skulls ability to work, you would probably have to snaketail back part of your Bloodletter unit to keep it within 18 inches of the Blood Secretor's start point, and probably use multiple Blood Secretors. Using the Gore Pilgrims Battalion, it's letting you open up that Portal of Skulls up to 30 to 36 inches. That's basically the whole board. And it also requires you to take Slaughter Priests. And oh, by the way, it lets you reroll failed prayers on your Slaughter Priests. So that seems like that's a really good synergy to have there. Violent Urgency and the trait on the Bloodthirster, again, that Violent Urgency trait you cannot take if you're not in the Khorne Allegiance. You could use the Bloodthirster as your general if you were not running a Khorne Allegiance, but personally, I would probably still use Violent Urgency. You get other benefits from the Blood Tithe as well. Murderlust gives you extra movement for 3 points. Very, very good when you're looking for extra movement added to your army. And the Apoplectic Frenzy, that just produces more attacks. It lets you pile in an attack in your opponent's hero phase, which is really awesome after you get off that first successful charge and you don't necessarily kill everything. Well, now you're frenzied on your next turn and you go kill more things. So here's just sort of a quick pro-con chart. Using a SAYL base list versus a Khorne Allegiance base list. So SAYL's movement piece is much more reliable versus the Khorne list. The Khorne list has a lot more die rolling involved. SAYL just automatically turns stuff into an 18-inch move. But for SAYL, that is limited to 1 unit per turn. When you're using the Khorne buffs, you can potentially get this to be 2 or 3 units of Bloodletters smacking your opponent on the first turn. Instead of 1 unit of 30, if your opponent has, say, 90 Bloodletters in their face on turn 1, each doing 2 attacks, so it's 180 attacks, and you get off, say, 1 Killing Frenzy on each of them, so they're all mortal wounding on 4s. So that's mathematically going to do about 90 mortal wounds on turn 1. And the requirements to do that are not insane. So it's possible. It's possible to do this. Part of the problem with SAYL is that his ability to change something to an 18-inch move is a spell. So it is in itself also not 100% reliable. So in some ways, the Khorne version is more reliable. The thing that SAYL also has to actively fight against is if you're running a Khorne-based list, which, you know, is probably what you're going to be doing with the Bloodletter bomb. Khorne is very anti-magic. If you have the Portal of Skulls opened up, he's going to force you to re-roll any successful casts of your own, not just your opponent's. And your opponent running Khorne is just like good night. Like the Brazen Rune is just a hard counter to a turn 1 Bloodletter bomb, just an auto unbind. It's basically a Dispel Scroll, which in a Khorne list, it's really easy to get, you know, a whole bunch of battalions, so you get a whole bunch of artifacts, so spending 1 on a Dispel Scroll in a competitive list where you're expecting to see things like SAYL and, you know, Tzeentch lists and other abusive magic abilities coming up, that's not a bad idea to be running a Brazen Rune. So it's it makes SAYL not as good. Using SAYL, you lose all of the other Khorne Allegiance abilities. One other more speculative issue with SAYL is that he is, I mean, I have down here that he's a compendium unit. He's sort of a compendium unit. He is a Forge World unit. And there have been some tournaments that have been prohibiting the use of these. SAYL in particular has been a target in some tournaments because of lists like this. I will say I have not faced a Bloodletter bomb list. I have faced this with other high mortal wound generating units being thrown across the table with SAYL. And it's really abusive. It's also really super bad for them when SAYL's spell doesn't go off. It puts them in a really bad position. I had one game that I played against the SAYL list, throwing, what are those things? The giant rats. Not rat ogres, but the name always escapes me of these things. But the giant rats that spray mortal wounds. And first turn, he was able to get, you know, his first unit across the table with him. Second turn, he fluffed the roll on the next unit, and it really turned the tide of the game because he was really heavily relying on the ability to use SAYL to throw these guys across the board. The Khorne Allegiance lists don't require magic. They require rolling, so you can still fluff some rolls, but you don't have that hard, like, this thing just doesn't work sort of issue. And if you're running generally a Khorne list rather than a SAYL Bloodletter bomb list, you know, you can just run a Khorne list that has a couple of big units of Bloodletters in it, or is using the Murder Host Battalion to get some hustle out of your Bloodletters, built in with a balanced Khorne list other than that. And if you fluff your rolls on getting those Bloodletters across the table turn 1, it's not as big of a deal because your opponent has a lot of other stuff that they've got to deal with. if you're running a balanced Khorne list. And because of the way the Khorne Allegiance list would work versus the SAYL list, you can run multiple units across the board in one turn. So it makes it such that you're not relying on just one unit to get there. You can potentially have multiple units, marching across the board. And if you're doing it with 2 or 3, if one gets there, then fantastic. Otherwise, your opponent's wasting a lot of shots or a lot of attacks, knocking down these relatively inexpensive units of Bloodletters that are going to be able to just do, if you're getting in close combat with them, they're going to do a lot of damage back to you anyway. That 5-up save is tough, but the point is that there's other options out there, and there's more that can be done. And because we get the Killing Frenzy ability, we have the Portal of Skulls being a lot easier to use in a Khorne Allegiance list using the Gore Pilgrims Battalion. You actually have a higher damage potential using less points that are 100% dedicated to the Bloodletter Bomb by going with the Khorne Allegiance over SAYL. So I think we're probably going to see the SAYL-based Bloodletter Bomb fall out of favor. It's one of those things that, SAYL throwing big, nasty units across the table is just a thing that everybody's prepared for at this point. It's part of the metagame of competitive tournaments. I've seen it pop up at small local tournaments. It doesn't have to be at, a big GT. I mean, I've had a unit of like 30 or 40 rats thrown across the table at me that had all kinds of buffs on them in Death Star type fashion with like Rend 2 and lots of attacks in like hit and wound buffs. SAYL being out there is a real consideration, and people are really starting to build their lists against it. And with the Blades of Khorne book specifically floating out there, there is so much anti-magic stuff in the Blades of Khorne book that it seems to me to be risky to run a list that is heavily dependent on magic. Anyway, that's about all I've really got for you guys on this. Bloodletter bombs, I think, are something I'll probably try out. I don't have the models currently to be running the Bloodletter bombs. I've got 10. I need a lot more than 10. So we're gonna have to see for my own personal list building and competitive nature if that's going to be happening or not. But this is something that I expect to see. I think we're going to see the Bloodletters make their way into more mainstream Khorne lists. That said, there's a lot of other possibilities that Khorne can run, so maybe the Bloodletter Bomb will just sort of fall out of favor because of all of the other options that you have in a Khorne Allegiance, and the movement aspect of it isn't quite as reliable as it would be with SAYL. So that's about all I've got on this, guys. Bloodletter bombs, even without SAYL, still extremely dangerous, still extremely powerful, in some ways more powerful. The movement aspect of them is toned down a little bit, but man, this could be really, really scary for certain armies that just aren't able to deal with this, because that's just an astronomical amount of mortal wounds that you can throw out there. Anyway, so that's all I really have for you for now. Feel free to leave comments and all of that down below. I'm sure I've gotten something wrong in here, and that is the number one thing that gets comments on my videos is when I fuck something up and you guys call me on it. And that makes me a better player. That makes you guys better. We're all thinking on our feet. We're all helping each other. So, of course, let me know what I did wrong in the comments down below. I will see you all later. And don't forget, blood for the blood god, skulls for the skull throne.